No daughter of mine is stupid enough to throw her life away in a war zone. My dad barked the day I signed those enlistment papers. It's funny how, less than a year later, that same man stood trembling, tears dripping down his chin, as the president shook my hand and called me a hero. Life has a brutal way of rewriting who we think the real fools are. The summer heat in Millfield, Ohio, pressed down on everything like a heavy blanket that nobody wanted but couldn't escape. I was 24, living in the same cramped two-bedroom house where I'd grown up, watching my life tick by one predictable day after another. Mom worked the morning shift at Murphy's Diner. Dad fixed cars at Henderson's garage, okay? And my 17-year-old sister, Emma, spent her days dreaming about colleges she'd never afford to attend. This was a town where everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves, where the biggest excitement was Friday night football in the fall and Saturday night bingo at the church in the winter, where girls like me were expected to marry someone like Tommy Richardson from high school, have babies by 26, and maybe work part-time at the same diner, where my mother had been serving coffee and dreams deferred for the past 20 years. But every night after washing dishes and helping Emma with her homework, I'd curl up on our threadbare couch and watch the news. Not the local stuff about county fairs and town council meetings, the real news. The stories from places I could barely pronounce, where people were fighting for their lives, where American soldiers were making a difference in ways that mattered. Beyond the borders of our dying little town, I'd watch footage of female soldiers distributing medicine to children in remote villages, of women in uniforms standing guard at checkpoints, protecting convoys, saving lives. Something inside me would stir, a restless energy that felt like it might consume me from the inside out if I didn't do something about it. The night I made my decision, I sat staring at my reflection in the black TV screen long after the news had ended. Our parents were asleep. Emma was texting friends about some drama I'd stopped caring about years ago. And I was just ... existing, taking up space in a world that seemed to have no place for the person I wanted to become the next morning. I drove to the recruitment office in neighboring Ashland without telling anyone where I was going. Staff Sergeant Martinez was a compact woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake who didn't try to sugarcoat what military life would be like. "It's hard," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Harder than most people expect. You'll be pushed beyond what you think you can handle. But if you're looking for purpose, for a chance to serve something bigger than yourself, there's no better place to find it." I signed the papers that afternoon. The drive home felt different somehow, like I was seeing our town through new eyes. The boarded-up storefronts, the rust-stained water tower, the teenagers hanging around the gas station with nothing better to do it, all looked smaller, more distant, like I was already moving away from it, even though I was still physically there. Dinner that night was the usual affair. Mom had made her famous meatloaf. Emma was complaining about her summer job at the local grocery store, and Dad was griping about Mr. Henderson's latest brilliant idea for improving the garage. Normal family conversation around our scratched wooden table, the kind of scene that had played out thousands of times before. But this time, I was about to change everything. "I have something to tell you all," I said, setting down my fork. The words came out steadier than I'd expected. Mom looked up from her plate, that worried expression she'd perfected over the years already creeping across her face. Emma stopped, mid-sentence about her annoying coworker. Dad kept chewing, but his eyes fixed on me with the intensity he usually reserved for stubborn engine problems. "I joined the Army today." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Emma's mouth fell open. Dad stopped chewing entirely, his jaw working like he was trying to process words in a foreign language. "What did you just say?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "I enlisted. I leave for basic training in 6 weeks. That's when Dad exploded. "Oh, you out of your goddamn mind?" He slammed his palm against the table hard enough to make the salt shaker jump. 24 years I've been busting my ass to keep this family together, and you want to throw your life away for what? 4 strangers who don't give a damn about you? It's not throwing my life away, Dad. It's finally doing something that matters. Matters. His laugh was bitter, harsh. What matters is family, Rachel. What matters is building something here, something real. Not running off to play soldier in some desert where you'll probably get yourself killed for people who'll forget your name. The second you're in the ground, Mom started crying then, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her napkin. Emma just stared at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. I'm not playing anything, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. This is about serving my country. About what? About proving you're tough. About showing up your old man who never did anything important enough for you? Dad's face was red now, veins bulging in his neck. Let me tell you something, sweetheart. The world doesn't need another hero. It needs people who take care of thee. Ones they love, who build something lasting instead of chasing after glory that'll get them killed. I'm not chasing glory. Then what are you chasing? 'Cause it sure as hell isn't here with us. The hurt in his voice cut deeper than the anger. I could see it in his eyes, the feeling that I was rejecting everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built for our family. But I couldn't make him understand that I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards something. I'm chasing the person I'm supposed to be, I said quietly. Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped against the linoleum. The person you're supposed to be is here, with your family, building a life that means something. Not getting yourself blown up in some war that's got nothing to do with us. Everything's connected, Dad. What happens over there affects what happens here. Bullshit. He grabbed his keys from the counter. You want to be a hero so bad. Start by not breaking your mother's heart. He slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Through the kitchen window, I watched him drive away, gravel spitting from under his tires. Mom was still crying. Emma was staring at me like she didn't know who I was anymore. Why? Mom whispered. Why would you do this to us? I tried to explain, tried to make them understand about the restless feeling, about wanting to serve something bigger than myself, about feeling like I was suffocating in a town where nothing ever changed. But the words felt inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone who'd been blind their whole life. That night, I lay in bed listening to my parents' muffled argument through the thin walls. Dad's voice was lower now, but no less intense. Mom's responses were punctuated by fresh tears. Emma had locked herself in her room and turned her music up loud enough to drown out the world. I stared at the ceiling. At the same water stain I'd been looking at since I was 12 and wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But underneath the doubt, underneath the fear of leaving everything familiar behind, there was something else. Something that felt like hope. 6 weeks later, I was standing in formation at Fort Benning, Georgia. While Drill Sergeant Williams explained in vivid detail exactly how pathetic we all were. The August sun beat down on us like a physical force, and I could feel sweat pooling in places I didn't know could sweat. You think you're tough because you made it through the first week? Williams shouted, his voice carrying across the entire company. You ain't seen nothing yet. Half of you won't make it through the next month. The other half will wish they hadn't. The girl next to me, a tall blonde from Montana named Sarah, swayed slightly in the heat. I reached out to steady her, and Williams was on us instantly. Did I say you could move, recruit? No, drill sergeant. Then why are you moving? She was about to fall. Drill sergeant. So, let her fall. In combat, you worry about yourself first, or you'll both be dead. You understand me? Yes, drill sergeant. Even as I shouted the required response, I knew he was wrong, at least partially. Yes, we had to be strong individually, but we also had to be strong together. That was the point of all this training, to forge us into something bigger than the sum of our parts. The days blurred together in a haze of physical exhaustion and mental challenges. We ran until our lungs burned. did push-ups until our arms shook, crawled through mud that seemed designed to seep into every pore of our bodies. I discovered muscles I didn't know I had. And then discovered what it felt like when those muscles screamed for mercy. At night, I'd collapse onto my narrow bunk and try to write letters home. Mom had sent a few short notes, carefully neutral, updates about the weather and Emma's job at the grocery store. But there was nothing from Dad. Not a word, not a card. Not even a message passed through Mom. It was like I'd ceased to exist the moment I'd signed those papers. "You okay, Ohio?" Carla Rodriguez asked one night, looking over from the bunk next to mine. She was a tough kid from East LA, all sharp angles and sharper wit. But she'd been looking out for me since day one. "Yeah, just tired. Bullshit. You've been moping around like somebody died. Family troubles." I told her about Dad, about the fight, about the silence that had followed me from Ohio to Georgia. Carla listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "My dad wasn't thrilled either," she said when I finished. "Said I was abandoning my responsibilities, leaving my little brothers without a role model. But you know what? Sometimes you gotta disappoint people to become the person you're meant to be." "Does it get easier?" "Missing them?" "Nah, but caring about what they think of your choices, that gets easier. You're not doing this for them, right? You're doing it for you, I guess. No guessing. We either know why you're here or you don't. And if you don't, Williams will eat you alive and spit out the bones." She was right. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. We learned to shoot, to march, to follow orders without question. We learned that sleep was a luxury, that comfort was weakness, that the only thing that mattered was the mission and the person next to you. But we also learned something else. We learned that we were capable of more than we'd ever imagined. Think that we could push through pain and exhaustion and fear to accomplish things that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. I watched Sarah from Montana transform from a girl who could barely do 10 push-ups into someone who could carry a wounded soldier twice her size. I saw Carla evolve from a street-smart kid with an attitude problem into a natural leader who could rally the entire platoon with just a few words. And slowly, gradually, I began to see changes in myself, too. My body grew stronger, more efficient. My mind became sharper, more focused. But more than that, I started to feel like I was becoming the person I'd always been meant to be. The night before graduation, I tried calling home. Mom answered on the third ring. "Rachel." "Oh, honey, how are you?" "I'm good, Mom, really good. I graduate tomorrow." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. So proud of you. Is Dad there?" The pause stretched long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. He's working late tonight, but he knows about graduation," I told him. "Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt you or Dad. I'm doing this because I have to. Because it's who I am. I know, honey. I think your father knows too. He's just scared. He's scared of losing you." He's not losing me, aren't we? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with everything we couldn't say. Because maybe she was right. Maybe the girl who'd grown up in that cramped house in Millfield was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, more sure of herself. Maybe that was what Dad had been afraid of all along. I'm still me, Mom. I'm just more me, if that makes sense. It does. And Rachel, I love you. No matter what happens, no matter where you go, I love you. I love you too, Mom. After I hung up, I sat in the phone booth for a long time, listening to the sounds of the base around me. Somewhere in the distance, a drill sergeant was putting a new group of recruits through their paces. Closer by, I could hear the low murmur of conversation from the barracks. The occasional laugh or shout. Tomorrow I would graduate. Tomorrow I would officially become a soldier. And after that, I would be deployed somewhere far from Ohio, far from everything I'd ever known. But tonight, for just a moment, I let myself miss the girl I used to be. The one who'd watched the news from her couch, dreaming about making a difference. That girl had been brave enough to take the first step. Now it was up to me to take all the rest. 7 months later, I was crouched behind a concrete barrier in Afghanistan, trying to make myself as small as possible while bullets whined overhead. The recruiter had mentioned that military life would be challenging, but somehow challenging didn't quite capture the experience of having people actively trying to kill you. Our forward operating base was a collection of prefabricated buildings and concrete. Walls surrounded by nothing but sand, rocks, and the occasional scraggly tree. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh, way-all-dramatic shadows and endless sky-but beauty. Was hard to appreciate when every rock formation could be hiding a sniper. I'd been assigned to a military police unit responsible for convoy security and checkpoint operations. It wasn't the glamorous combat role I'd sometimes imagined, but it was vital work. We were the thin line between order and chaos, between the supplies that kept our forces running and the insurgents who wanted to disrupt everything we were trying to build. Carla had been assigned to the same unit, which made the deployment bearable. We'd grown closer during advanced training, and having someone who understood where I came from made the isolation of being so far from home less crushing. "You ever wonder what we're really doing here?" she asked one night as we sat on guard. "Duty, watching the empty road that stretched toward the mountains." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're fighting for people who might not want us here. It's trying to build something that might not last. Risking our lives for reasons that aren't always clear. You ever wonder if it's worth it?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. I think about the kids I see when we're out on patrol. It's the ones who wave at us, who smile when we hand out candy. If we can make their lives a little safer, a little better, then yeah, it's worth it. Even if it means never seeing your family again, even then. But 3 weeks later, as I pressed my back against that concrete barrier and listened to the sound of automatic weapons fire getting closer, I wondered if I'd been naive. If the girl from Ohio who'd watched the news and dreamed of making a difference had really understood what she was signing up for. Our convoy had been heading back from a routine patrol when the ambush started. 3 vehicles, 12 soldiers. And suddenly, we were in the middle of a firefight that felt nothing like the training exercises we'd run hundreds of times. The sound was the first thing that hit you, not just the gunfire, but the way it echoed off the rocks, the way it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then came the smell of cordite and dust, and the taste of fear in your mouth like copper pennies. "Rodriguez is hit." Someone shouted over the noise. I looked around frantically and saw Carla slumped against the side of our vehicle, blood spreading across her uniform. She was conscious but pale, her usually sharp eyes unfocused with pain. Training kicked in before conscious thought. I sprinted across the open ground between us, staying low, ignoring the bullets that seemed to be coming from every direction. When I reached her, I could see the wounded deep gash across her thigh where shrapnel had torn through her gear. "I'm okay," she gasped, but the amount of blood said otherwise. "I like how you are." I pulled out my first aid kit and started working, trying to remember everything I'd learned about treating battlefield wounds. My hands were shaking, but they moved with a certainty that surprised me. "Pressure here," I told her, guiding her. "Hands to the wound. Keep pressure on it while I get the tourniquet ready." The fighting continued around us, but it felt distant now, like background noise. All that mattered was stopping the bleeding, keeping Carla conscious, getting her to safety. I tied the tourniquet above the wound, tightening it until the bleeding slowed to a manageable level. "Can you move?" "I think so." "'Kay. On 3, we're going to move behind that wall over there. You ready?" She nodded, and we made the dash together, her arm around my shoulders, my arm around her waist. Halfway there, I felt something hot slice across my shoulder, but I kept moving. We made it to cover just as the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. The rest of the firefight was a blur of movement and noise and controlled chaos. The insurgents melted away as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving us with 2 wounded soldiers and a convoy that looked like it had been through a meat grinder. It wasn't until we were back at base, sitting in the medical tent while a corpsman cleaned the shrapnel wound on my shoulder, that I realized what had happened. We'd been in actual combat. People had tried to kill us, and we'd fought back. Carla was alive because I'd acted quickly and correctly under fire. "You saved my life," she said from the bed next to mine. "You would have done the same for me." "Yeah, but I didn't have to. You did." She was quiet for a moment. "Your dad would be proud." I doubted that. Dad had been afraid I'd get myself killed playing soldier, and I'd come pretty close to proving him right. But I'd also discovered something about myself in that moment, when everything was chaos and death was a very real possibility. I discovered that I could be counted on. That when everything went to hell, I could keep my head and do what needed to be done. 3 days later, Captain Morrison called me into his office. "Rodriguez tells me you performed exceptionally well under fire the other day," he said, looking up from a stack of paperwork. "I just did what anyone would have done, sir." "No. You did what a soldier would have done. What someone with training and courage and the right instincts would have done. That's not the same as what anyone would have done." He told me that my actions had been witnessed by several people, including an embedded journalist who'd been traveling with another unit, that there might be some recognition coming my way. That this was the kind of thing that defined careers. But all I could think about was Carla. Alive and complaining about the hospital food, about the fact that I'd been tested in a way I'd never imagined, and I hadn't broken. I'd bent, maybe, but I hadn't broken. That night, I sat in my bunk and tried to write a letter home. I wanted to tell them about the ambush, about what I'd done, about how I'd felt in that moment when everything depended on me making the right choice. But the words wouldn't come. How do you explain to people who've never been in combat what it feels like to save someone's life? How do you make them understand that you're not the same person who left home all those months ago? Instead, I wrote about the landscape, about the people I'd met, about how the stars looked different here than they did in Ohio. Safe things. Things that wouldn't make Mom cry or give Dad more reasons to think I'd made a terrible mistake. But as I sealed the letter, I realized something. I wasn't writing to convince them that I'd made the right choice. I was writing because I missed them, because I loved them, because they were part of who I was, no matter how far I traveled or how much I changed. The girl from Ohio was still there, somewhere inside the soldier I'd become. And maybe that was enough. 2 months after the ambush, I was standing in the rose garden of the White House, trying not to fidget with my dress uniform while a small crowd of military officials and family members gathered on the pristine lawn. The ceremony was supposed to start in 15 minutes, and I felt like I might throw up. "You look green, soldier," said Master Sergeant Kelly, the protocol officer who'd been shepherding me through the day's events. "You need to sit down." "No, I'm fine, just nervous. About meeting the president, about everything." The past few weeks had been a whirlwind I still didn't fully understand. The story of the ambush had somehow made its way up the chain of command, and then to the media, and then to the attention of people whose names I'd only heard on the news. Suddenly, I was being flown back to Washington for a ceremony I'd never dreamed of attending. The Medal of Valor wasn't the highest honor the military could bestow, but it was significant enough that the president himself would be presenting it. For exceptional bravery in combat, they said. For actions that saved lives and reflected the highest traditions of military service. I kept expecting someone to realize they'd made a mistake. That I was just a girl from Ohio who'd done what anyone would have done in the same situation. But here I was, standing in the Rose Garden, about to shake hands with the President of the United States. "Is your family here?" Master Sergeant Kelly asked. "My mom and sister are supposed to be here somewhere. I'm not sure about my dad." Sent them all invitations. But I hadn't heard back from Dad. Mom had called to say she and Emma would be there, that they wouldn't miss this for anything. But Dad... Dad hadn't spoken to me since the day I'd enlisted. "There's someone you should meet," Kelly said. and led me over to a man in a dark suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a movie about important government officials. "This is Deputy Chief of Staff Morrison," Kelly said. "It's been coordinating with the White House on your ceremony." Morrison shook my hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested he'd been practicing it for decades. "It's an honor to meet you, Specialist. Your actions in Afghanistan have been an inspiration to people all across the country." "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad everyone made it home safely." That's exactly the kind of humility we need more of in this world. "The president is looking forward to meeting you." The next few minutes passed in a blur of introductions and last-minute preparations. I met other medal recipients, shook hands with generals whose names I'd only heard in briefings, and tried to process the fact that this was all really happening. Then, someone said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." And everything went quiet. He was smaller than I'd expected, more human somehow than the figure I'd seen on television. But when he walked over to where I was standing, when he looked me in the eye and smiled, I understood why people followed him. "Specialist Thompson," he said, and his voice was warm, genuine. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "It's an honor, Mr. President." "The honor is mine. What you did over there, the way you put your life on the line for your fellow soldiers, that's what makes America great. That's what makes me proud to be your Commander-in-Chief." The ceremony itself was surprisingly brief. A military band played. Someone read a citation that made my actions sound far more heroic than they'd felt at the time. And then the president was pinning the medal to my uniform and shaking my hand while cameras flashed around us. "Your country is proud of you," he said quietly, just for me to hear. "Your parents should be too." "Thank you, Mr. President. What's next for you, Specialist?" "Going back to Afghanistan, sir. My unit is still deployed." "Good. They need soldiers like you." He paused, then added, "Your parents are here, you know." In the crowd, they look like they're about to burst with pride. I turned to look into the small gathering of family members and dignitaries, scanning the faces for the ones I'd been hoping to see. Mom was there, tears streaming down her face, clutching Emma's hand. Emma was grinning and waving like she was at a rock concert and standing behind them. Looking uncomfortable in a suit I'd never seen before was Dad. He was holding a folded piece of paper that I realized was the invitation I'd sent him. His eyes were red, and when he caught me looking at him, he mouthed 3 words that I've been waiting months to hear. "I'm so proud." After the ceremony, after the photos and the handshakes and the congratulations from people I'd never met, I finally made my way over to where my family was waiting. Mom got to me first, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "I can't believe this is real." Emma was bouncing on her toes, full of questions about the White House and the president and whether I'd gotten to see the Oval Office. But my attention was focused on Dad, who was standing a few feet away, looking at me like he was seeing me. "For the first time, Dad," I said, "Rachel." His voice was rough, emotional. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do." He stepped closer, and I could see the tears he was trying to hold back. "I was wrong about everything. About what you were doing, about why you were doing it, about what kind of person you are. I was so scared of losing you that I couldn't see who you were becoming." "Dad, let me finish." He pulled me into a hug that felt like it might crush my ribs. "I watched you up there getting that medal from the president, and I realized something. I raised a hero. I raised someone who's brave enough to put her life on the line for others, strong enough to do the right thing even when it's hard. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." We stood there for a long time, just holding each other while the crowd around us gradually dispersed. Mom and Emma waited patiently, understanding that this was a moment that had been building for months. "I brought something for you," Dad said, finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small American flag, carefully folded, and handed it to me. "This flew over the garage for the entire time you were deployed. I wanted you to have it." I took the flag, feeling its weight in my hands. It was such a simple thing, but it represented everything I'd been fighting for: home, family, the idea that we could be better than we were, that we could protect the things that mattered most. "Thank you," I said. "No," he replied. "Thank you for serving, for making us all proud, for showing me what real courage looks like." That night, over dinner at a restaurant none of us could really afford, Dad told me about the day I'd enlisted, about how he'd driven around for hours afterward, angry and scared and feeling like he'd failed as a father, about how he'd gradually come to understand that letting me go was the most important thing he could do for me. "I still worry," he said, "every day. Every time I see something on the news about Afghanistan, my heart stops. But I'm not going to let that worry keep me from being proud of you. I'll be careful, Dad. I promise. I know you will. And I know you'll keep doing the right thing, even when it's hard. That's who you are." The next morning, I flew back to Afghanistan, carrying Dad's flag in my kit bag and a new understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. It wasn't just about the training or the weapons or the missions. It was about representing something bigger than yourself, about being someone others could count on when everything went wrong. But most of all, was about coming home changed and having the people who loved you understand that change was part of growing up, part of becoming the person you were meant to be. 8 months later, I was sitting in the back of a taxi watching the familiar landscape of rural Ohio roll past the window. The corn was high and green. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only existed in the Midwest. And everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left. But I wasn't the same person who'd driven this route 2 years ago. Burning with restless energy and dreams of something bigger, I was coming home for good this time. My deployment was over, my service commitment was complete, and I had decisions to make about what came next. The Army had offered me a promotion, a chance to stay in and build a career. But I'd also been accepted to college on the GI Bill. And there were other possibilities I was still considering. The taxi turned onto Maple Street, and I could see our house at the end of the block. It looked smaller than I remembered, but warm and welcoming in the afternoon sun. Mom's flower garden was in full bloom, and Dad's truck was parked in the driveway. Cleaner than I'd ever seen it. As we pulled up to the curb, the front door opened, and Emma came running out, followed more slowly by Mom and Dad. I paid the driver, shouldered my duffel bag, and walked up the path I'd walked thousands of times before. But this time, Dad was waiting for me on the porch, his arms open wide. "Welcome home, soldier," he said, pulling me into the tightest hug of my life. "It's good to be home, Dad." "I missed you so much," Mom said, joining the hug. We all did. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement, full of questions about my flight and my uniform and whether I'd brought her anything from Afghanistan. But underneath the chatter and the celebration, I could feel something different in the air, a respect that hadn't been there before, a recognition of who I'd become that evening. The whole neighborhood seemed to turn out for what Mom called a simple barbecue, but which looked more like a block party. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought her famous potato salad. The Johnsons from across the street showed up with folding chairs and a cooler full of beer. And even Tommy Richardson, who I'd successfully avoided for most of high school, made an appearance. "I can't believe you actually did it," he said, shaking my hand with something that looked like genuine admiration. "I mean, Afghanistan and everything. That's incredible. It was just my job, Tommy." "Yeah, but not everyone could do your job, you know. Not everyone would have the guts." I looked around at the gathering, at all these people I'd grown up with who were treating me like some kind of celebrity, and felt oddly disconnected from it all. They meant well, but they were seeing something that wasn't quite real. They were seeing a hero, a symbol, someone who'd gone off to war and come back covered in glory. The reality was more complicated than that. I'd done my job, yes, and I'd done it well. But I'd also seen things that had changed me in ways I was still trying to understand. I'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, was doing what needed to be done despite the fear. I'd discovered that strength wasn't about being tough all the time, was about being vulnerable when it mattered. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were done, I sat on the porch with Dad watching the stars come out. Over the town where I'd grown up, it's different, he said. It's different. You coming home. Everything. He was quiet for a moment. When you left, I thought I was losing my little girl. I was afraid you'd come back changed. And I was right. But I was wrong about what that change would mean. How so? I thought it would make you harder, colder. I thought it would take away the person I knew and love. But it didn't. It just made you more yourself, if that makes sense. I thought about Carla, about the ambush, about the moment when I'd realized I could be counted on when everything went to hell. I thought about the president's handshake, about Dad's tears, about the flag that was now folded in my dresser drawer. Upstairs, I'm still figuring out who I am, I said. That's okay. You've got time. What if I don't stay? What if I decide to go back to the army or go to college somewhere far away? Dad was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but emotional. Then I'll be proud of you for making the choice that's right for you. I'll miss you like crazy, but I'll be proud. Even if it means leaving Millfield behind, especially then. This town will always be here if you need it. But you're meant for bigger things than this place can offer. I've known that since you were little, even if it took me a while to admit it. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the same water stain on the ceiling that I'd been looking at for years. But instead of feeling trapped by the familiarity, I felt grounded by it. This was where I'd come from, where I'd learned. The values that had carried me through the hardest moments of my life. The work ethic from watching Dad fix engines with patient precision. The compassion from seeing Mom care for everyone in our neighborhood. The determination from growing up in a place where dreams felt impossible, but people kept dreaming anyway. My dress uniform was hanging on the chair beside my bed, the Medal of Valor catching the moonlight from the window. But what mattered more than the medal was the conversation I'd had with Dad on the porch. The understanding that had finally passed between us. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had been coming in all day. Carla had sent a photo from her new assignment in Germany, grinning and giving me a thumbs up. My old drill sergeant had forwarded a news article about the ceremony, with a note that said, "Knew you had it in you, soldier?" There were dozens of messages from people I'd served with, from high school friends, from neighbors who'd watched me grow up. But the one that meant the most was a simple text from Dad, sent just an hour ago. "I'm proud of the woman you've become. Whatever you choose to do next, I'll be cheering you on." I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, thinking about the choices ahead of me. The Army had offered me a chance to become an officer, to make the military my career. The college acceptance letters were stacked on my desk, each one representing a different path forward. There were job offers from companies that wanted to hire veterans, opportunities to work with organizations that helped other soldiers transition back to civilian life. For the first time in years, I felt like I had real choices. Not just the choice between staying and leaving, but choices about what kind of person I wanted to become. What kind of life I wanted to build the next morning. I woke up to the smell of Mom's famous pancakes drifting up from the kitchen. I found her at the stove, already dressed and humming to herself as she worked. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, turning to give me a kiss on the cheek. "Sleep well? Better than I have in months. It's good to have you home." We ate breakfast together, just the two of us, while Dad was at the garage and Emma was still asleep. It was peaceful in a way I'd almost forgotten how to appreciate. No alarms, no formations, no sense of urgency about anything except enjoying the moment. "Mom," I said, "I need to ask you something. What is it? Are you disappointed that I'm not the same person who left here 2 years ago?" She set down her coffee cup and looked at me with the kind of serious expression she usually reserved for important conversations. "Oh, honey, I'm not disappointed. I'm amazed. You left here as a girl who was searching for something, and you came back as a woman who found it. But I'm different now. Okay? I see things differently. I think about things differently." "Good. That's what growing up is supposed to do. It's supposed to change you. She reached across the table and took my hand. When you were little, you used to ask me if I was proud of you, and I always said yes, because I was. But I was proud of you for being my daughter, for being a good kid, for doing well in school. Now I'm proud of you for who you've become, for the choices you've made for the person you are. Even if those choices take me away from here again, especially then. Rachel, this town is too small for someone like you. It always has been. Your father and I, we built our lives here, and we're happy with that. But you, you're meant for bigger things. After breakfast, I walked downtown, something I hadn't done in years. Main Street looked different somehow, smaller and shabbier than I remembered. Half the storefronts were empty, and the ones that were still open had a tired, worn-down look that spoke of businesses hanging on by threads. But as I walked, people kept stopping me. Mrs. Patterson from the library wanted to thank me for my service. Mr. Garcia from the hardware store asked if I was planning to stay in town. A group of teenagers I didn't recognize pointed me out to each other and whispered excitedly. By the time I reached the old diner, where Mom had worked all those years, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't just Rachel Thompson anymore. I was Rachel Thompson who'd gone to war, who'd saved lives, who'd met the president. I was a symbol of something these people needed to believe in, that it was possible to leave this place and do something important, something that mattered. The weight of that realization was both humbling and terrifying. That afternoon, I found myself at the cemetery where my grandparents were buried. I hadn't visited their graves since before I'd enlisted, and I felt like I owed them an explanation of who I'd become. "I did it, Grandpa," I said quietly, standing in front of the simple headstone. "I went out and saw the world, just like you always said I should. I found out what I was made of." My grandfather had been a World War II veteran, though he'd never talked much about his service. But I remembered him telling me stories about the places he'd seen, the people he'd met, the things he'd learned about himself when he was far from home. "I think you'd be proud of me," I continued. "I think you'd understand why I had to leave, why I had to do something that scared everyone who loved me." As I stood there, I thought about the circle of it all. My grandfather had left his small town to serve his country, had come back changed by the experience, had spent the rest of his life trying to make sense of what he'd seen and done. Now I was doing the same thing, following a path that felt both entirely new and strangely familiar. That evening, Dad found me sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the town I'd grown up in. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Just thinking about what comes next. And what does come next." I was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I think I'm going to take the job with the Veterans Organization in Columbus. It's the one that helps soldiers transition back to civilian life." "That sounds perfect for you." "It's not the Army, and it's not staying here. Something in between. Sometimes in between is exactly where you need to be." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights come on in houses across the neighborhood. Families were gathering for dinner, kids were being called in from playing in the yards, and life was going on in the same rhythm it had been following for decades. "Dad," I said finally, "I need you to know something." "What's that?" "I'm not running away from this place. Or from you and Mom. I'm running toward something. And I couldn't do that if I hadn't learned what home really means first." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. It took me a while to understand, but I know that now. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." Later, that night I sat at my childhood desk and wrote in a journal I'd been keeping since Afghanistan. I wrote about the ceremony, about Dad's tears, about the way it felt to be home but not quite the same. I wrote about the choices ahead of me, about the person I was becoming, about the bridge I was trying to build between the girl I'd been and the woman I was becoming. The last entry was simple. I did it, became the person I was meant to be. And the people who love me most are proud of me for it. That's all I ever really wanted. I closed the journal and looked around my room one more time. Tomorrow, I would start making plans for the next chapter of my life. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in the place that had shaped me, surrounded by the people who'd loved me enough to let me go and brave enough to welcome me back. The water stain on the ceiling was still there. And it probably always would be, but it didn't define this room anymore, just like this town didn't define me. They were part of my story, important chapters in the book of who I was becoming, but they weren't the whole story that was still being written. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of courage at a time. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to see what came next.